Day 1348 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 1,143,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 940 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, no tanks, 4 APVs, and 25 artillery. Now to the Russian map, where their monitoring channels have been lighting up all weekend, with drone alerts across multiple regions, as the AFU's UAV birds impose significant sanctions on the Russian Federation. So to start, in Russia's Black Sea coast export chain in Krasnodar Krai, where the Rosneft-operated Tuapse marine oil terminal was struck overnight, with the tanker and port infrastructure hit by SBU and other security forces. 5 hits were recorded in total. The strikes caused the tanker to catch fire, and where at least 4 oil tanker standers used for loading and unloading ships were disabled. Several port buildings were also damaged. Simultaneously, it's the Sochi and Temryak areas, also reportedly targeted along this Black Sea coast export chain by more UAVs. So the immediate effect is operational friction at these sites, where inspections, cordons, and rolling shutdowns of loadout equipment that slow berth-in windows, extend turnaround times, and create cascading delays across Russia's Black Sea export schedule. Now, up to this point, as it comes to all Russian oil-related targets, it's the striking on these port terminals that has been a rare sight to see. It causes oil export revenues to take a hit, but the additional takeaway here is that these facilities, once considered insulated by distance, now require sustained air defense coverage and redundancy planning across multiple ports. Russia's safe zones are shrinking by the week, and war has a way of coming home to those who export it. Then, on the map and over the weekend, multiple drone strikes launched by Ukrainian forces targeted the traction substation at the Usman facility in Russia's Lipetsk region, marking one of the most direct hits on rail power infrastructure in the region to date. The Lipetsk governor acknowledged the facility was on fire and that local air defense systems had engaged UAVs overnight, but stopped short of linking that to the specific Usman substation fire fallout. So updates like these can indeed be significant. Disruption to rail traction power and marine terminals, relatively unscathed till now, can slow down logistics movements, especially along corridors servicing Western front lines. So this would align with a broader Ukrainian strategy of targeting Russia's energy and rail power infrastructure beyond the immediate front line, becoming a pattern of attacks previously documented only along bordering Russian regions. Then to Moscow, where it's said to be 3 pipelines and 0 hesitation, as Ukraine's military intelligence described the targeting of the 400-kilometer ring road Kolstovoy pipeline outside Moscow early yesterday morning, disabling all 3 lines that carry aviation fuel, diesel, and gasoline from refineries in Ryazan, Nizhny Novgorod, and Moscow itself. The strike reportedly hit the Ramensky district, breaching the system despite anti-drone nets and armed guards. So this operation is shaping up to have dealt a major blow to Russian military logistics, cutting a vital supply route that feeds bases and airfields around the capital, and with some Russian regions already facing fuel shortages. The shutdown risks further strain on air operations and frontline transport. Strategically, this action cranks up the pressure on Russia's war economy, with the pipeline supplying fuel to military bases and air stations around the capital, which formed a critical node in Moscow region supply. Then, around the same time, power was knocked out in the Moscow suburb of Zakhovsky after a Ukrainian drone attack, demonstrating the vulnerability of Russia's power grid, especially so far away in a politically sensitive region. They shouldn't be seeing any aerial incursions at all. What happened to their air defenses? Then also on the map, and earlier on, coming into the weekend, Ukraine's Navy commented on use of their land-adapted R-360 Neptune cruise missiles to strike the Oriol Combined Heat and Power Plant, and next to that, an electrical node near Bryansk, all aimed at energy assets tied to regional defense manufacturing. Regional officials acknowledged an incident at the Oriol plant, that prompted temporary limits on heat and water supply, which then leads into a similar and nearby event at Zelenogorsk of Kursk, said to partake in a little bavovna itself at the power station, plunging parts of the region into darkness, showing how Moscow's rear areas keep getting smaller and smaller. So on the topic of district and regional outages, Media, the man leading the world's best and most rapidly expanding drone team, explains to Russians that the blackouts experienced by several regions over the weekend is only getting started, as he addressed the Russians with words such as "blackouts are not scary," and that the Ukrainian Defense Forces promise a rapid, albeit somewhat forced, adaptation, making a reference to an upcoming difficult winter for Russia, as he suggested that the blackouts are part of a broader phase of Ukraine's retaliatory strike campaign, signaling that energy disruptions will intensify as Ukrainian forces mirror Russian tactics from previous and future strikes. Now into the main map, and starting out in Alchevsk of occupied Luhansk for a moment, as in a similar vein, Ukrainian drones struck an electrical substation overnight, cutting power across nearby areas. Videos showed arcs of light as the grid failed after impact, with local channels linking the event to a drone strike. The outage disrupted electricity and rail lines used for Russian military transport, which goes a long way to constrain fuel and supply movements deeper into occupied territory. And for a location which is hardly surprising, given the location of impact is rather directly east of numerous intense frontline battles at present. And this strike was also complemented by another explosion further in the occupied west at Horlivka, truly the long-time whipping boy in the immediate rear. And wouldn't you know it, also 2014 Donbass lines. Now, speaking of this major western-facing front, as we see the Ukrainian Defense Forces pushing back the invader further in the Dobrapilla direction, stamping out the most northern of Russian positions, as the old bunny ears get hollowed out of Russian vestiges, with the weight of the AFU forces starting to have a downward pressure in the direction of the Pokrovsk axis, as they finalize cleaning up the northern part of this sector. And for that matter, nearby at Radinsk, where earlier yesterday it was cleared of Russian invaders on the eastern edge, safe for now. And then speaking of Pokrovsk, Ukraine's top military leadership convened in the Pokrovsk direction as the critical reinforcement and counter-infiltration operation entered a high-risk phase yesterday. Alexander Syrsky, chief commander of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, confirmed that Pokrovsk and Mercenary to make a statement to say that no encirclement or blockade of these towns exists, while vowing full logistical support. Further, Ukrainian military sources report that approximately half of Pokrovsk is still contested, and that the inclusion of Special Forces strikes are aimed at disrupting rear command nodes and several Russian established footholds in the region. If Ukrainian command maintains control of key pockets and supply routes, they may avert a full Russian encirclement of the Pokrovsk-Mercenary axis. However, if Russia succeeds in consolidating control over that axis, then Ukraine's supply lines for the western Donetsk sector would become disrupted on the immediate front. Now, overall, the attritional theater of war that is this frontline Pokrovsk sector has been evolving into a targeted counter-infiltration and a set of urban denying operations rather than full-scale counteroffensives. Russian forces, numbering well over 100,000, have been spent on this front over the past 12 to 18 months, a figure that is roughly equivalent to double the population of the town of Pokrovsk itself. Pre-war, of course. Meanwhile, on the map, in the Lerman direction, briefly, the AFU advanced north of Yampil, taking back some of the initiative here, and putting the pressure and the brakes on the Russian army's southwest push into this region of late. Then further west on the map, and briefly again to Zaporizhzhia, with a renewed uptick in counteroffensive operations as Ukraine's 128th Separate Mountain Assault Brigade infiltrated, establishing a unit northwest of Kamyansk. These activities are evolving around the Plavny settlement, where we may expect some more concrete updates from this latest news soon. Then to take a look around the map, Ukrainian soldiers from the 72nd Mechanized Brigade destroy Russian supply tankers and vehicles, with these updates specifically coming from operations taking place inside of Belgorod itself. The FPVs strike from afar. Next on the map, but to take a bit of a different look, we see what remains of a Russian armed forces assault group consisting of African mercenaries eliminated near near Kupiansk, where here shows their African-Russian ID cards. And so on this general topic of external manpower required to feed Russia's war machine, we head to the news where Russia has officially expanded the jurisdiction of its southern military district to include the occupied regions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia, and is now mobilizing residents from those territories for frontline service. The shift allows Moscow to apply Russian conscription laws directly to these occupied zones, where under this latest plan, Russia aims to conscript between 50 to 100,000 men aged 18 to 55 from these territories over the coming months, targeting those who have received Russian passports or been registered by occupation administrations. This initiative follows a July 2024 decree that nominally assigned the regions to the SMD, so the Southern Military District. But this recent change marks active mobilization, with local administrations compiling lists of eligible men, sending dossiers to Russian military commissariats, and issuing summonses via state-controlled apps or on-site checks. However, all of this news does mark a rather odd announcement. First of all, the timing, coming into winter. But even more importantly, a large portion of eligible men in these regions were sent off to the front to fight in the SMO some time ago, a long time ago, in some cases up to a decade ago, where it comes to the Donbass populations. And we see this with very limited representation of adult males within the population from most footage that comes out of the Donbass. Now, obviously, this is an illegal wartime practice to mobilize those you occupy, but it also appears to represent a delay in the Kremlin's information flow from the battlefield, suggesting a lag in Moscow's situational awareness and administrative reach. Because with far fewer eligible civilians for the draft, let alone willing recruits, the Kremlin's renewed mobilization drive appears both desperate and disconnected from the realities on the ground. Then to a quick look at actual Russian civilians on the streets of Moscow, as part of a combination of news and a funny, with the political capital that has traditionally been the most protected and least affected region of the country. But we see here, in this case, Moscow residents were asked whether the 19th package of EU sanctions against Russia would affect their lives. Some appeared to shrug off concerns, while others spoke on concerns of inflationary pressures, pensions, and housing issues. Another man spoke on the effects that the ongoing sanctions have already had on their economy, but decided not to go into too much detail for fear of being seen to negatively speak on the topic and get thrown in the gulag. But then also, one guy's input was to say that sanctions affected the supply of toilets, but that it didn't matter as they have toilets anyway. What a cornerstone of a topic central to responding about the Russian economy. Spoken like a true toilet thieving so-and-so. Funnily enough, this guy is spot on with his EU sanctions package, as the European Union's 19th package against Russia does include a ban on the export of toilets, bidets, flush-in cisterns, and similar sanitary ware items to Russia. Don't trust a Russian to know when toilets make the list. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, subscribe, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!